Thank you, Justin. Yes, I definitely have a different perspective from an academic angle. So when the first lockdown hit, we had to turn all our on-campus modules into online ones in less than a week. So I had the added complexity where I was running 40 student projects with external clients for a consultancy module. And I had consultants who were overseeing the projects as well. So turning the actual module and the materials into interactive online ones wasn't difficult, but chasing for student engagement was really tricky. It meant that my team and I were spending 3 times the amount of time than normal chasing students to make sure they were still there, they were okay, they were engaging, what's going on, how can we help you, how can we support you? We actually found that it worked better for the clients that gave us the projects, as we could have online regular small meetings to monitor the projects far more closely. Often when we had physical projects, the client would find it tricky to continually spend their time coming into campus to meet with students. So they actually preferred the online meeting and got better outputs because we could, as I said, monitor the engagement and see what was going on, and we could sort of traffic light system if the projects were going the wrong way to bring them back on track. With managing external relationships, I actually found that it sped up the process, as clients expected online meetings almost instantly. And if it wasn't delivered, then the relationship would be lost, either on the current project. So sometimes we found that the client would say, I'm not working with that student group anymore, and our students were left without a client. So we had to kind of try and rebuild those relationships. Also, it worked positively that the clients could see how much effort we were putting in, and then we've had them back in subsequent years for other projects in a hybrid approach. When it comes to actually building new relationships, for me, it's easier in a way because I'm offering a service whereby the client gets a project delivered for free and it only costs their time. So it's a lot easier when you're giving something as opposed to, asking people for their money and their input in that way. For the student side, there are still some students who haven't actually attended campus since enrolling in September 2020. So there's a real difficulty in not having a sense of community, which is really heartbreaking. So we've had to put in extra online sessions in for groups and one-to-one sessions, personal tutor sessions. And if you spend 15-20 minutes with each of your tutees, it's really difficult and time consuming when you have hundreds of students.
I want to turn maybe specifically to how we sell our message and get buy-in, and how this may differ between virtual and face-to-face interactions. I'm going to come to Justin first on that one. So Justin, what differences are you seeing in how your teams are selling their message between virtual and face-to-face interaction? So for example, any challenges you're seeing, any advantages, how they're adapting, how well equipped they are? Perhaps you could just maybe share some thoughts on that, Justin, please.
So kind of building on the comments that I made earlier around the behaviors that we tried to adopt. One thing that I've recognized early on is that the customer behavior has changed. If you think back to how customers engaged in their evaluation journey previously, maybe 5-6 years ago, they came to businesses a lot earlier in that journey, and we had time to build some value and to present some offerings. Behavior now, and by behavior I also mean my behavior, we don't tend to disclose ourselves or expose ourselves until much further into the evaluation cycle. And indeed, enterprise customers are starting to behave more and more like consumers. And that is that when a consumer comes to you, when a business comes to you and says, I would like to learn more about your product, service, etc., they've already typically carried out their own evaluation. So this is an inflection point. This is them saying to you, essentially, I've qualified you in. I would like to understand whether I can go further with you. So it's very important at that point to make sure that the next touch points, the next experiences that the customer has actually add incremental value to the things that they've already experienced. If you think of it from your own personal perspective, when you've looked at 3 or 4 items online and you finally approached a vendor, you don't want to be told all the things that you know. You want to be told the things that you don't know that will help you make that decision. So we found that with COVID as well, people having more time to pursue personal projects, we had to understand quite early in the engagement platform, the engagement process, was this a valid funded project that had a life cycle within the business? Was this something that somebody had the additional time to pursue in parallel, which could become a valid and funded project, in fairness? So again, it's back to that curiosity process. It's back to that making sure we ask the right questions, making sure we understand what the outcomes are that the customer needs. And also kind of changing how we work, because we've lost the travel time, we've lost the thinking time, we've lost the planning time, as it were, that we used to have in our physical day-to-day engagements. It's too easy to fill your day with Zoom meetings. It's we have the expression being a Zoom warrior. When I look at some of the calendars of myself, my peers, you know, we're jumping from call to call to call, and I think we've all been on those. Oh, sorry, I've got to go, I'm on another call. But we're not giving ourselves typically that time to reflect on what the previous conversation was, what the commitments were, what the outcomes and actions were. So slowing that piece down is something that we've been driving quite strongly internally. And it does mean that we're delivering better outcomes to those customers. Things like mutual delivery plans, making sure that the customer and our teams understand what we're going to do, when we're going to do it. It basically lays out the carpet for creating a successful engagement. And I think that's really where the focuses have changed in terms of managing our time and managing the outcome. I would hazard a guess that most people on this panel and on the call are behaving in a slightly different way now as consumers. We're ordering things to be delivered to our homes that we wouldn't necessarily have ordered before. We're spending more time online doing other things other than just work. And therefore, when those consumers, as it were, come to us, our job is to raise our game and to deliver, if you like, the additional information, the additional knowledge that they don't yet have to help them make that decision a little bit better. And the other thing that I've noticed a lot is how we communicate with those different consumer groups or consumer profiles. And I guess, you know, for Kate, this is probably fairly significant, as the majority age group that your teams are engaging with are millennials and Generation Z, who have very specific communication styles as well.
So yes, completely. And I like the fact that you said about the slowdown piece, Justin, and blocking out time to reflect on learning. The issue I find is it was with a lack of boundaries. So that's from colleagues and from the millennials, the students. So with our diaries, you can see when people have blocked out time when you've got meetings, but still, whilst I'm in a meeting, then somebody will try and call me on Teams. So today, for example, I've had to completely quit Teams and everything in the background to make sure I don't get those interruptions. Also, I came back from a holiday, a week's holiday, and found that 40 meetings had been blocked in my diary for the following week. I was like, I think I'm going for the Guinness World Record in online meetings. I needed, you know, an eye test by the end of it. I was fed up of seeing my own face. And it showed that my schedule, that I was already blocked out in other things, and I was double and triple booked. And I thought, it's people can see what your schedule is, but the lack of boundaries. You know, I like the point of having outcome meeting points that was mentioned, but I think this also depends on the audience and the industry. So in academia, there's a lot of online interactions are acceptable, as we're not selling a product in a way, well, when I'm doing the employability angle, but we're offering benefits to the organization. But I think in many other environments, that a face-to-face still has more clout to get business, and more persuasion is needed. You know, many relationships have been broken, not by myself, and I've actually had to spend a lot of time rebuilding those client relationships because there wasn't that instant response. So it's playing catch up and a bit of firefighting at the moment for myself. But what do you think about your interactions, Chris? I'd be interested to see from your side.
As I mentioned earlier on, most of our Most of our interactions with customers are through existing customers, so intermediaries who already have an agency with us. And the challenge for us was just making sure that we were getting the breadth of that engagement across all of them. We found that there was a real intensity to the engagement. We could achieve more in less time in the hybrid working. And you talked about speeding up there, Kate, and Justin earlier had talked about the need to slow things down, and pace was definitely a factor for us. So there was an intensity to the meetings, and we've got we got used to, haven't we? Face-to-face meetings, you talk about the journey, you talk about the weather, the football last night, and at the start of the pandemic we had none of that. So we were able to get into the nuts and bolts of the conversation much quicker. I mentioned earlier on that we're a specialist insurer. The way in which we differentiate ourselves from our competitors is that we talk about what the factors that are impacting customers. So we issue barometer reports. When we would do those face-to-face, there'd be a printed brochure, well thought through, fantastic production. But that old sales tactic of you not wanting to hand it across the meeting table because, the first thing someone will do is they'll hide behind it. You didn't have any of that, again, in the kind of the Teams environment, but you had the opportunity to share a screen. And you could see that the person that you were engaging with was engaging in the same content. You had their attention because they had nothing else. There was nothing else, as long as Justin said, the WhatsApps are turned off and all of those sorts of things. But if you could set the meeting up correctly and make the content engaging, then you had a captive audience. So that was certainly one of the advantages that we found as we came into this. We are a small insurer, again, smaller than some of those household names that advertise on the telly, and therefore our premises are appropriate. And hybrid working levels the playing field. We're all impressed, aren't we, when we walk into a swanky tower block office building with fancy coffee machines and loads of people. But again, back to the hybrid working, we were all doing the same sort of thing. People were in back rooms. There was, there might have been backdrops, privacy, so we didn't see. It was all about the content rather than kind of the venue. And from our point of view, that felt like an advantage because we were straight into talking about the customer's needs. The distractions were taken away. We're into the customer's needs. What is it that they need? These are our solutions. This is the product that delivers those. And again, using some of the things that Justin was talking about in terms of customer feeling like they already know what they want. Well, we were able to unsettle and disturb some of those assumptions by using the content and the insight that we had available to us. And the final advantage I was going to mention was about the ability to bring in additional stakeholders through this sort of hybrid working. So subject matter experts, they're not readily available. They're people that are heavily in demand because they're subject matter experts. So to get them in front of our brokers and the brokers' clients in an in-person environment is important to us, but is challenging logistically. These guys are based all across the country, customers are based all over across the country, and suddenly we had a medium that again leveled that playing field and enabled us to get subject matter experts in front of customers very quickly, and again sort of highlight and promote that access to decision makers that they were getting from us. So those were the three advantages, and I think the disadvantage is probably one that we can all sort of recognize. The lack of face-to-face engagement, that we're a heavily regulated industry, but hospitality still plays a part, in terms of networking opportunities, the chance to meet new customers, and conferences and the like, and those sorts of things have fallen by the wayside. So since restrictions have been lifted, we've worked hard to re-engage on a face-to-face environment, but it has tended to be on a one-to-one basis rather than in larger groups. So, we're looking forward to that becoming more expansive as restrictions are lifted. But, hopefully in 2022, things will be different. But a balance is going to be key for us, I think, as we go forward.